From Martina so far in this first set. First serve really hasn't worked up to its usual high standard. What cost her that other serve?
Sobrang di ko pa mapaniwala. Maraming salamat sa suporta. Sana patuloy yung suporta niyo sa akin.
I think for United players, especially the juniors, I think it's a great opportunity to be exposed to this level and this.
Best moment I think was the happiest I've ever been was winning first Wimbledon.
Navratilova explodes. EALA'S Australian Open nightmare sparks racism scandal. 24-hour ultimatum issued. Welcome back to Champions Tennisitics, the only place where we don't just cover tennis. We uncover the chaos, the controversy, and the carnage that the mainstream media won't touch. If you're new here, strap in, because we're about to take you on a wild ride through one of the most explosive stories to hit the tennis world in years. And if you're a returning champion, you already know we deliver the heat. Today, we're diving headfirst into a story that has the entire tennis establishment scrambling for cover. We're talking about the Australian Open disaster that has left fans outraged, legends furious, and one young superstar caught in the crossfire of what many are calling blatant disrespect. The name on everyone's lips? Alex EALA. The question burning through social media? Why the racism? Martina Navratilova, the 18-time Grand Slam champion, and a woman who has never been afraid to call out injustice, has reportedly unleashed a verbal assault on tournament organizers that is reverberating through every corner of the tennis world. The alleged crime? Shoving the Filipino sensation onto a glorified practice court while thousands of her fans were left in chaos, sparking security nightmares and raising uncomfortable questions about how the sport treats its rising stars from underrepresented nations. But here's where it gets even juicier. While Melbourne is still reeling from the fallout, Alex EALA has already moved on. She's landed in Manila like a warrior returning from battle, and she's got unfinished business. The Philippine Women's Open is about to become ground zero for redemption, and guess who's standing in her way in the first round? A Russian rival who demolished her 6 years ago. This isn't just a tennis match anymore. This is personal. This is about pride. This is about proving that the girl they tried to bury in Melbourne is actually a force of nature that cannot be contained. So grab your coffee, silence your phone, and get comfortable, because we're going deep. We're talking courtside chaos, international incidents, celebrity confrontations, and a homecoming that could define an entire career. This is the story of Alex EALA'S Australian Open nightmare and her Manila resurrection. Let's get into it. The disaster began not with a loss, not with an injury, but with a scheduling decision so baffling that it has sparked an international controversy. Alex EALA, the 20-year-old phenomenon who has captured the hearts of millions across Southeast Asia and beyond, arrived at the Australian Open as the 49th ranked player in the world. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't some unknown qualifier scraping her way through the early rounds. This is a legitimate top 50 player with Grand Slam pedigree at the junior level, a WTA title under her belt, and a social media following that rivals players ranked in the top 10. So where did the Australian Open organizers decide to schedule her main draw debut? Rod Laver Arena, where the biggest stars play under the lights. Margaret Court Arena, the traditional home for rising talents. Show Court 3, at least, where there's room for a proper crowd. No, and absolutely not. They put her on Court 6. For those unfamiliar with Melbourne Park's layout, Court 6 is what tennis insiders politely call a backcourt. It's what the rest of us would call a shoebox. It seats maybe a few hundred people if you pack them in like sardines. There are no giant screens. There's minimal infrastructure. It's the kind of court where you schedule first-round matches between players ranked outside the top 200, not a global superstar with a rabid fan base. The decision was met with immediate backlash. Filipino tennis communities across social media erupted in disbelief. How could the tournament make such an obvious miscalculation? But the organizers stuck to their guns, and the match was scheduled. What happened next was entirely predictable to anyone who has been paying attention to EALA'S meteoric rise, but apparently came as a complete shock to the Australian Open's planning committee. Hours before the match was set to begin, fans started arriving. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. We're talking about a massive wave of Filipino supporters, many of whom had traveled from across Australia, and even flown in from the Philippines specifically to see their hero compete on the Grand Slam stage. They came waving flags the size of bedsheets. They came with drums, with chants, with face paint in the red, white, blue, and yellow of the Philippine flag. They came ready to turn a tennis match into a festival, a celebration, a moment of national pride. And there was nowhere to put them. The scenes outside Court 6 quickly descended into chaos. The limited capacity was reached within minutes of the gates opening. Security personnel found themselves overwhelmed as thousands of fans pressed against barriers, desperate for even a glimpse of the court. The queue stretched for what witnesses described as hundreds of meters, snaking through the grounds like a restless dragon. People were crushed together in the heat. Tempers flared. Chants of "We want Alex" rang out across Melbourne Park, audible even to players warming up on the practice courts. Tournament security was forced to call for backup. Police were put on standby. The situation had escalated from a scheduling hiccup to a legitimate safety concern, all because someone in the tournament office had catastrophically underestimated EALA'S drawing power. Or had they? That's where this story takes a darker turn. Social media exploded with a question that wouldn't go away. Why? Why would you put a player with millions of followers, a player who is arguably the biggest active sports star in a nation of 115 million people, on a court that couldn't accommodate even a fraction of her support? Fans started doing the math. They looked at other matches scheduled that day on the show courts. They saw players ranked lower than EALA. They saw players with less star power, smaller followings, and fewer compelling storylines. And they were all given better treatment. The conversations grew heated. The word disrespect started trending. And then came the accusation that nobody in tennis wants to hear, but many were thinking. Was this racism? Was this yet another example of the tennis establishment treating players from non-traditional tennis nations as second-class citizens, regardless of their ranking or their popularity? These weren't fringe voices or trolls stirring up trouble. These were longtime tennis fans, Filipino community leaders, and sports journalists asking legitimate questions about systematic bias and how tournaments allocate their most valuable resource, court time and visibility. The Australian Open had a public relations crisis on its hands, and it was about to get much, much worse. Enter Martina Navratilova, a woman who has spent her entire life fighting for equality and fairness in sports. The Czech-American legend, who defected from communist Czechoslovakia to pursue freedom and tennis glory, who fought for equal prize money for women, who has been an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ rights and social justice, reportedly saw what was happening in Melbourne and decided she'd had enough. According to multiple reports circulating through tennis media and social networks, Navratilova didn't mince words. She allegedly confronted the issue head-on, asking the question that was on everyone's mind, but that few with her platform were brave enough to voice publicly. Why the racism? Those three words, attributed to one of the sport's most respected voices, transformed this from a controversy into a crisis. Now, we need to be clear about something. Martina Navratilova is not some reactionary looking to stir up trouble. She is a Hall of Famer whose opinion carries enormous weight in the tennis community. When she speaks, people listen. When she uses a term as loaded and serious as racism, she's not doing it casually. She's making a calculated statement that there is something fundamentally wrong with how this situation was handled. Her alleged criticism reportedly focused on several key points. First, the failure to recognize EALA as the global phenomenon she has become. This isn't just about ranking. This is about understanding the modern tennis landscape, where players can have massive influence and drawing power that transcends their current position in the standings. EALA has over 1 million followers on Instagram alone. She's been featured in international advertising campaigns. She's a household name across Asia. Ignoring that isn't just bad business, it's willful blindness. Second, the reported double standard. Navratilova allegedly pointed out that if this were a British player, an American player, or an Australian player with half of EALA'S ranking and a fraction of her following, they would have been given prime placement. The implication was clear and uncomfortable. The tennis establishment still operates with unconscious, or perhaps even conscious, biases about which players deserve the spotlight and which can be shuffled to the margins. Third, the safety implications. By creating a situation where thousands of fans were denied access and left in potentially dangerous crowding conditions, The tournament had failed in its basic duty of care. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was reckless. And it was entirely avoidable if the organizers had simply acknowledged reality and planned accordingly. The backlash to Navratilova's reported comments was swift but divided. Progressive fans and many in the tennis media praised her for saying what needed to be said. They argued that tennis has long had a problem with how it treats players from emerging markets, and that this was simply the latest and most visible example. On the other side, tournament defenders and some traditionalists pushed back, insisting this was merely a scheduling error, not evidence of systematic discrimination. But the damage was done. The story had escaped the confines of tennis forums and Filipino community pages. It was now international news. Major sports outlets were picking it up. The phrase Australian Open racism scandal was trending globally, and the tournament organizers, who had remained silent throughout the initial controversy, found themselves facing a 24-hour ultimatum. Filipino fan groups, community organizations, and sports advocacy networks reportedly came together to issue a coordinated demand. They wanted answers. They wanted an official explanation for the scheduling decision. They wanted an apology for the chaos and the disrespect. And they wanted it within 24 hours, or they would escalate the matter to the International Tennis Federation, calling for a formal investigation into potential bias in court allocations and scheduling practices. This was no longer just about one match or one player. This had become a referendum on how tennis treats diversity, how it values different markets, and whether it's truly committed to being the global sport it claims to be. The Australian Open, one of the four most prestigious tournaments in the world, was facing a legitimacy crisis, and the clock was ticking. But here's the thing about all this controversy and chaos. There was still an actual tennis match that had to be played. And Alex Ila, caught in the eye of this international storm, still had to walk onto that cramped, overcrowded court 6 and compete at the highest level of the sport. The pressure on her young shoulders was immense. Not only was she making her Australian Open main draw debut, she was doing it with the weight of an entire nation's expectations, a logistical nightmare unfolding around her, and a growing international incident that she never asked for. Her opponent was Alicia Parks of the United States, a powerful 23-year-old with a dangerous game built around a massive serve and aggressive baseline hitting. Parks came into the match ranked 97th in the world, making this a classic clash between a rising star and a dangerous floater. On paper, it was competitive. In the fevered atmosphere of Court 6, it became something else entirely. When Alex Ila walked onto the court, the noise was absolutely deafening. Every available seat was filled. Every standing room spot was packed. The fans who had made it inside were determined to make enough noise for the thousands who couldn't get in. It was less like a tennis match and more like a football derby or a boxing match. The atmosphere was electric, intimidating, and utterly unique for a first-round Grand Slam match. And for the first 30 minutes, it looked like Alex Ila was going to ride that wave of energy straight into the second round. She came out absolutely firing on all cylinders. Her movement was crisp. Her ball striking was clean and aggressive. Her shot placement was surgical. Alicia Parks, for all her power and talent, looked completely overwhelmed by both the player across the net and the raucous crowd surrounding them. Ila broke Parks' serve early and never looked back in the opening set. She was painting the lines, hitting winners from impossible angles, and showing the kind of fearless tennis that has made her such an exciting prospect. The Filipino fans were in absolute raptures. Every point Ila won was celebrated like a Grand Slam title. The chants never stopped. The energy never dipped. And when Ila closed out the first set 6-0, delivering a bagel to her American opponent in front of this wild crowd, it felt like destiny was unfolding. A 6-love opening set in your Grand Slam main draw debut, against a top 100 opponent, in front of thousands of your countrymen. This was the stuff of dreams. This was the moment that was supposed to silence all the critics, answer all the questions about scheduling, and announce to the tennis world that Alex Ila had arrived. The script was perfect. But tennis, as any true fan knows, doesn't follow scripts. Tennis has a cruel way of teaching humility exactly when you think you've got it figured out. The second set began, and something shifted. Alicia Parks, to her immense credit, made adjustments. She stopped trying to match Ila's pace and started imposing her own game. She began serving bigger, taking the ball earlier, and refusing to be intimidated by the partisan crowd. Where she had looked tentative in the first set, she now looked determined. And slowly, inexorably, the momentum began to swing. But here's where the story takes another complicated turn. The crowd that had been such an asset for EALA in the first set became a double-edged sword in the second. The Filipino fans, desperate to help their hero, started cheering for every Parks error. They cheered when she missed a first serve. They cheered when she hit a ball long. They cheered, loudly, when she double faulted. In the emotional heat of the moment, they crossed lines of tennis etiquette that are rarely violated at professional matches. Tennis tradition dictates that you applaud good play and remain silent during points and between serves. You don't cheer for your opponent's mistakes, and you certainly don't cheer for double faults. It's considered poor sportsmanship, and it's exactly the kind of behavior that can fire up a competitor who's already struggling. And that's precisely what happened to Alicia Parks. The American player later told reporters that the crowd behavior was difficult to deal with, but that she ultimately used it as motivation. She got angry. She got focused. She stopped worrying about winning the fans over and started worrying only about winning the match. And her power game, which had been dormant in the first set, suddenly came roaring to life. Parks began hammering serves that EALA couldn't return. She started dictating rallies with her forehand, pushing EALA back behind the baseline and forcing errors. The confident, aggressive EALA from the first set was now scrambling, defending, trying to weather a storm that kept intensifying. Parks took the second set 6-3, and suddenly this match that had looked like a coronation was now a dogfight. The third set was brutal. EALA fought with everything she had. She saved break points. She chased down balls that seemed impossible to reach. She showed tremendous heart and resilience. But the power difference was becoming too much to overcome. Parks was simply hitting the ball harder and flatter than EALA could consistently handle. The American broke serve midway through the set and never gave it back. She closed out the match 6-2 in the third, completing an improbable comeback from a set and love down. EALA'S Australian Open main draw debut was over. The dream had died on court 6, the same court that had sparked an international controversy. The final score, 6-love, 3-6, 2-6, told a story of dominance, collapse, and ultimately defeat. But anyone who watched that match knows the scoreline doesn't capture even a fraction of what actually happened. EALA didn't just lose a tennis match. She survived a circus. She played under conditions that no first-round player should have to endure, with organizational chaos swirling around her, security concerns outside the court, and international controversy bearing down on her young shoulders. After the match, EALA showed the kind of class that has made her so beloved. She didn't complain about the conditions. She didn't blame the crowd or make excuses. She met with reporters and called the support heartwarming despite the loss. She acknowledged that the atmosphere was unique and special, even if the result wasn't what she wanted. Then she spent nearly an hour signing autographs for the fans who had waited in the scorching Australian heat for hours just to catch a glimpse of her. She posed for photos. She hugged crying children. She thanked people for their support. She showed more grace and maturity in defeat than the tournament organizers showed in their planning. And that contrast didn't go unnoticed. While the Australian Open continued to deal with the public relations disaster unfolding around them, EALA was already moving forward. Champions don't dwell on defeats. They reload, refocus, and come back stronger. And that's exactly what EALA did. Within days of her Melbourne exit, she had already touched down in Manila, returning to her home country not as a defeated athlete, but as a conquering hero preparing for her next battle. The Philippine Women's Open, a historic WTA 125 tournament being held at the Rizal Memorial Tennis Center, represents something truly special for Filipino tennis. This is the first time an event of this magnitude has been held on Philippine soil. It's a watershed moment for the sport in the country, and there is only one player who could possibly be the face of it. EALA is not just participating in this tournament. She is the tournament. She is the reason tickets sold out in record time. She is the reason international media is paying attention. She is the reason young Filipino kids are picking up tennis rackets for the first time. If the Australian Open didn't want to give her the center stage she deserved, Manila is rolling out the red carpet. And EALA is seated second, positioned for a deep run that could culminate in a title on home soil. But the tennis gods, ever fond of dramatic storytelling, had one more twist to add to this narrative. When the draw was released, EALA'S first-round opponent was revealed, and suddenly this tournament became about more than just redemption. It became about revenge.
Kamusta mga kapong Pinoy? Surprise! Excited na akong imbitahin kayong lahat na manood sa mga laban ko sa Mubadala Abu